Okay, here's our mission. Everything you need to know to cook and can your own tomato sauce from fresh tomatoes. We buy way too much of this delicious but wildly expensive tomato sauce. I started growing my own tomatoes this year with the intention of making my own equally delicious sauce. What I'm not going to do is walk you through a specific recipe. I've discovered that there's as many different styles and preferences as there are people in Italy. So what I will do is share some general tips for those of you who, like me, figure what's so hard about making and canning your own sauce. Important lesson learned: commercial canning operations have access to equipment that can do far more than consumer products can. Let me break down my initial goal. Cooking delicious tomato sauce from fresh tomatoes isn't very hard. Canning tomato sauce isn't very hard. Canning your perfect delicious recipe, that's hard. Here's why. Canning anything can be dangerous. Not so much the actual canning part, but the danger of baddies having a field day in your sauce if you do it wrong. You need to follow USDA tested recipes and guidelines carefully in order to make sure that any harmful baddies are completely dead, not just mostly dead. High acid foods create an environment that's not friendly to baddies. Tomatoes can be a high acid food, but modern varieties are at best borderline with a pH of about 4.6, and at worst, not even close. One option is to add citric acid or lemon juice to tomatoes before canning them to get over that high acid threshold. You can imagine how this could seriously mess with your perfect recipe. The other home option is pressure canning. A pressure canner is just an oversized pressure cooker. They can build the pressure inside so that water boils at 240 degrees Fahrenheit rather than just standard 212 degrees, the boiling point at sea level. Canning any low acid foods requires cooking in a pressure cooker. How does that mess with your perfect recipe? Well, it blast cooks your food for an extra hour plus at 240 degrees. Moreover, most pressure canning recipes, which as I mentioned need to be carefully followed, include little to no oil or fat. Some recipes that include meat allow a little more fat, inevitable, but what if your perfect recipe has a heavy dose of olive oil? It gets tricky. Not only can the oil insulate the food and prevent it from getting hot enough, but it can also seriously mess with the ability of your cans to seal properly if the oil bubbles out between the lid and the mason jar, which it probably will. So what do we do about it? My recommendation, one of a few things. Try out a USDA approved recipe. Maybe you'll get lucky and it'll be just your style. Probably not likely. If you have a perfect recipe that happens to include heavy doses of delicious meat, olive oil, or butter, here are a couple options. Freeze it. If you plan to use it in the not too distant future, freeze it. It'll come back to life pretty well. If you already convinced your partner to invest in an expensive pressure cooker just for this purpose, however, and need to prove its worth, here's another option. Just can the tomatoes. Good old-fashioned canned crushed tomatoes. When you're ready for your perfect sauce, pop a can, add your other ingredients, simmer for a bit, and you're in business. A couple final tips. Those tomatoes, make sure they're ripe. I'm talking deep red, a little squishy, not your sandwich ideal ripe. If they're not there yet, let them sit for a few days. Your sauce will only be as good as your ingredients. You want tomatoes that when peeled look like this, not like this. If you haven't found your perfect recipe yet, try out this one from Smitten Kitchen. Rather than a whole ton of ingredients, it uses tomatoes and a simple olive oil that you infuse with some basil leaves, garlic, and crushed red pepper. That's about it. It's light, clean, tart, sweet, and just about the perfect marinara. It's also easy and quick recipe if you already have your canned crushed tomatoes.